Marissa Gonzalez, who is the co-president of the Latinx Law Students Association, is going to be introducing the senator this evening, and then we'll get started with our conversation. She and I will talk for probably about half an hour, and then we'll have time for audience questions. So we encourage you to think of questions that you might like to ask to the senator. This is a tremendous opportunity, and we're so thankful for you being here with us tonight.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Thank you so much, Professor. So Senator Monique Limon was elected to the Senate in November 2020 and represents the 19th Senate District, which includes all of Santa Barbara County and over half of Ventura County. She is the second woman and first Latina in history to represent this district. Senator Limon was born and raised in the 19th District and has worked continuously to serve her community as an educator, leader, and advocate for causes advancing the quality of life in her community. Before the state Senate, Senator Limon served as the Assembly member for District 37. Serving 4 years in the State Assembly, Senator Limon chaired the Banking and Finance Committee and was the vice chair of the Legislative Women's Caucus. For Senator Limon, education has always been a priority. A UC Berkeley graduate with a master's degree from Columbia University, she served 2 terms on the Santa Barbara Unified School Board and as assistant director for the McNair Scholars Program at the University of California, Santa Barbara, prior to serving in the Senate. She also worked with countless local students at Santa Barbara City College and UC Santa Barbara as an advisor and mentor to help them achieve their professional and academic goals. As former commissioner on the Santa Barbara County Commission for Women, Senator Limon helped connect private and public resources with women in the community. Senator Limon has a passion for bringing community groups together and building strong coalitions among local nonprofit organizations and civic groups. She has also authored numerous environmental bills that squarely take on the oil industry in California. McGeorge welcomes Senator Monique Limon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you again for being here with us this evening. We've all been looking forward to this event, and I wanted to just start things off by asking you what inspired you to get involved in public service and ultimately run for office?
Well, I have to start by telling folks that I'm an accidental politician. I did not mean to do this. This was not my life plan. I was born and raised in the community that I now represent. And as the daughter of immigrants and first in my family to go to college, I spent so much time thinking about the education space and ended up going into the education space, working with students, helping them transition from one academic milestone to the other, and really doing research at a 4-year university. And through that work, I realized very quickly, as an educator, you realize this right away, that what happens within the 4 walls of a classroom is always influenced by what's happening in the community. So as much as I wanted to help the students that I was representing, the students that I was working with, I also knew that there were issues related to housing, to jobs, to health that were impacting them, and they would show up in the classroom. And this was whether I was working with a junior high school student or a PhD student. I mean, this was continuously what I saw. So I started getting involved with local nonprofits, trying to find ways through the nonprofit sector on my volunteer time to work, to help our community. And one thing led to another. I ran for school board. I swore that that was the only thing that I would do. From school board, people started talking to me about running for state office. So school board, state assembly, and now state senate. And still to this day, so much of what influences the work that I do has to do with the lived experiences that I had as an educator in our community for over 14 years, working with so many students and watching the issues that impacted their education. Again, we're not limited to just that classroom experience. Everything that happens in a community shows up in the classroom.
I think that's absolutely true. And kind of the complexity of the issues that are seen in the classroom manifest themselves in so many of the policy issues facing the state, as you said. So getting involved in that conversation seems like it's been really meaningful for you.
Yes, no, it's absolutely been meaningful, also difficult, but I think it's really important too that I bring a lived experience to this, right? Not just the theory. I think the theory is so important, but the practice of what it looks like to have a student who doesn't have a place to live, try to achieve their academic milestones. There's going to be challenges to, find a place to live in a complicated and very expensive housing market. I've had students that I've worked with whose parents were deported. I mean, the issues just like go on and on and on, and you start to realize you have to care about what happens in a community. And I think so many institutions of higher ed, so many institutions of education show that in different ways, that in order for us to be successful, and I still say us, because I think once you're an educator, it's like always in your heart. So in order for us to think about how we help our students, we have to be aware of what's happening. And I think I bring that to the table as a policymaker.
Absolutely. When kind of reviewing your legislative agenda, it seems like education has been a pillar, and also the fact that you're from a district where there's substantial oil and gas production.
Yes.
And it seems to be the case that if you're from a district like that, you're either anti or pro-industry, depending on your background and your perspective. Can you share a little bit about what that's like for you in terms of how it influences your legislative agenda?
Absolutely. So I grew up, again, born and raised in the community, and our community has been a community that has been very pro-industry for over 100 years. So we've had oil in our district for well over 100 years. And it turns out that the district's thoughts and feelings and stance on oil issues have evolved in those 100 years. We went from a community that very much welcomed the oil industry and wanted the jobs and wanted the revenue and the taxes that came with that, to now, a century plus later, realizing that there's a lot of elements that don't work. Air pollution, water pollution, soil contamination, among the many things. We've had the largest oil spill in California history, happened off that coast. And we have both offshore and onshore oil. We've had multiple oil spills, some that people don't hear about on a regular basis, but other bigger ones like the 2015 Gaviota spill that happened. And all of those experiences and all of those events that happened in the district have very much shaped how I feel, how my constituents feel about the oil industry and about what's happened. Certainly we are, a place where environmental protections are very important to us. And I don't even see it as so much being pro or against, as much as I am someone who represents the district. And that district feels very strongly about environmental protections as a result of a lived history. So this is not abstract. We've lived it, right? We've seen ranchers have their water contaminated and cattle die. We've seen an abundance of animals. My father, for more than 40 years worked in the tourism industry, right? He worked at a hotel. He was a hotel worker. And guess what happens when there's an oil spill? People don't come to visit your beaches. And if that's how people are making a living, you start to see all of these other industries and all of these other workers impacted. So again, I've always said I'm with my district, and if my district's opinions change, then that's where I will be. But yes, I am one of the few legislators that takes on a very big industry. And when I say I take on, I don't think it's a matter of just having, issues that are, do you agree or do you not agree? But the really bringing to light very complicated issues. So one of the specific issues that I work on is who pays for abandoned oil wells once they've been orphaned? Where is it gonna be the taxpayer? Is it gonna be the industry? What kinds of tools, financing tools are we going to use? And so I think that this one is one where the oil industry agrees with me. We have a problem, right? California has over 30,000 idle wells in the state. Some are properly abandoned, some are orphaned, some are still idle, but they've been idle for 25 years. What are we gonna do to clean these up? And in Santa Barbara and Ventura County, there are hundreds and hundreds there, but we are actually not one of the communities that has the most. LA County has the most, and they are closest to people. And so this is something, again, we all see, we agree that there is a problem, but the tools and the mechanism and the approach we use to try to solve it is one where perhaps I sometimes differ with the industry, but there's been times where we are together working on the same big issue that the state estimates will take anywhere from $100 million to $5 billion to clean up. So trying to come up with a funding mechanism is not easy. It's not a black or white thing, right? It's something you work on every year. And those are, again, issues that I deeply care about. But I don't think I'm alone either. My district cares about them, and I think that others across the state care about these issues as well.
Sure, I mean, certainly, it seems like you're talking about your lived experience in your district and also that of your constituents, changing over time and reacting to what's going on with regard to the oil industry and potential shifts. And I think that kind of responsiveness is kind of at the core of policymaking, right?
Absolutely.
Looking at issues and not just seeing black and white, but seeing the complexity. And I wanted to talk to you about the fact that you chair the Senate Banking and Financial Institutions Committee. That's exciting. Can you tell us a little bit about that, how you got there, what that experience is like?
So you gotta love the legislature, right? How does an educator end up chairing banking and finance? So appointments in the legislature just happen really through our leadership, right? The Assembly Speaker or the Senate Pro Tem will make the appointments to any and all committees that we have. And I got appointed as a freshman to the Banking and Finance Committee. I asked to be in that committee because the educator in me wanted to continue learning on a subject matter that I did not know a lot about. And so I get put on this committee, and this is a true story. I get put on this committee. I love it. I think financial institutions impact the lives of everyone, whether you have access to one or you don't. And then there was a transition, and the chair was no longer in that position, and I became chair. And I quickly put on, again, the lens of my lived experience. And what do financial institutions mean to consumers? And I took on an issue that has been an issue that I have to give credit to, predecessors 2-3 decades before me, which was predatory lending and what we know as payday lending. What do you do when you have people who really need an emergency loan? And I remember what emergency loans were like as a student, right? You need an emergency loan, but it turns out that the interest rate is anywhere from 200 to 300% for that. And that was legal. And it took me 3 years, but I think I quickly became known for some of the work that I've done in banking and financing in the state. And I realized that it was the student in me, the educator in me, that worked really hard to become a subject matter expert in this particular space. And I knew something had changed when I was invited to go to Washington, D.C. and testify in front of a congressional committee that addressed these issues. I was like, oh, they think I'm the expert. And it was really around how we passed some of this reform around predatory lending. Very happy that we were able to pass landmark legislation where we capped the interest rates at 36%. Now I know people still think 36% is really high. Probably none of us in this room would want a 36% credit card because that is extremely high. But when you're getting it down from 300 or 400 or 200 or even 150% interest rate, 36 is a much better number. And so we've done some of this incredible work. And again, it's putting on the lens of, when you are in need, that is not a time to take advantage of you, right? When you need to take out an emergency loan, what does that look like? And so we've been working in that space, and I'm proud of the work I did there. I'm proud of the fact that California, under my leadership and my bill, established a consumer protection agency. Time and time again, we just saw that people had questions about these financial products that are out there. And it's a very fascinating space, especially because there's a lot of federal preemption. So for those of you that like the state versus federal roles, like this is a great space to be in it because there are certain things we can do as a state to regulate some of our financial institutions and products. And it's not always institutions, sometimes it's products. It's particularly fascinating just because we do have that intersection. But the other thing is we're up and coming in this country and really in the world on fintech, and there's not a whole lot of case law on it. So try writing laws on products that we don't know tons about that are evolving. That also is very interesting. So as you can tell, I like it a lot, and it's great to be in that role.
No, I think that's exciting, and as you said, as a lifelong educator, continuing to learn about things. I worked in the legislature many years ago, and I chose to staff Rev and Tax for the same reason. It was not my wheelhouse, but I wanted to learn about it. So I think, obviously, predatory lending is a hugely problematic issue, and to be doing something in that space is certainly positive for so many people in the state of California. And thinking about, thinking about your work thus far and your background experience, women's issues have also been a big part of what you have done, both in your work and then legislatively. I know you mentioned you were vice chair of the Women's Caucus in the Assembly. Can you tell us a little bit about that experience, issues that you see on the horizon, and kind of your own experience as a woman elected official?
Right. So I came from a school board, and in the school board role, there are more women elected to office, but certainly that is not the case in the Assembly or in the state legislature. We are 38 strong in the entire legislature out of 120. So we still have some work to do in California in terms of just representing our overall population. And I think that one of my shocks has been, or surprises, has been that even in 2020 or 2021, there's still a lot of first for women. And that feels odd because we would have, at least I would have expected that a lot of the first would have happened. So the fact that I'm the first woman of color to be elected by my district to run for the state Senate, I'm the first woman of color in either the Senate or the Assembly to chair banking. I mean, there's still so many firsts. I'm only the second woman in California history to have a newborn while in the state Senate. I mean, I have a list of first or second, and I think it speaks to the fact that we still have a need to really create spaces for diverse folks of people to become policymakers, to make these decisions, right, on behalf of Californians. And it's hard. There's times that are hard. There's times that you're very proud in it. But also, we, from my lens, being the former vice chair of the Legislative Women's Caucus and still caring a lot about the issues and knowing everything that I've gone through, I also look at, what are elements that we can do in the state legislature that start to change the system, right? That we make system change. And so right now I have a bill that's going to be quite, it's going to cause quite a bit of discussion in the legislature, and it's my Pay Equity Transparency Act. It's a bill that would require employers of 100 or more to disclose a salary range. Well, Colorado just did it. California is now, I believe it's our turn to do this. We have tried several pay equity bills in the legislature. They have all been uphill battles, major uphill battles. And we expect that we're going to get quite a bit of discussion on that. So what do you do when especially during, after the pandemic where we've seen a very large number of women leave the workforce? And how do we get women back? Well, we know that something that's very helpful for any and every employee who's applying for a job is to know what the salary range is when you're applying. It gives you a leverage in terms of being able to negotiate what that particular salary is. Like, as much information as an employee can have is the most helpful. So we are moving that forward. We're also looking at the contract the contract workers, which is the third party employees. That is becoming a very popular thing. Some companies actually have more contract workers than they do in-house workers as well. So you'll see that. It'll generate quite a bit of discussion. I feel like over the weekend alone, I was like, oh, wow. We were seeing quite a bit of discussion about it, but it will be a very heavy lift.
No, that's good to know. I think that's another area, again, that's very complex but needs some reform, and glad to hear that you're working in that space as well. I was kind of thinking generally about your legislative accomplishments thus far, and I was curious to know what you consider to be your proudest legislative accomplishment.
Wow. So I think that I have a few. I don't think it's one. I think that one of the things that brings the most joy is actually your hardest, for me. My hardest bills have been what I think have been my proudest legislative accomplishments. What makes a bill hard? Very often, the bill is going to have a systems impact. The bill is not an easy sell to legislators or to even the public, right? We have to provide the evidence to be able to move a bill forward. And so there have been a few, but certainly, I talked about the predatory lending, AB 539, which is, I think will be one of my landmark pieces of legislation while I'm in the legislature. I did have another bill where I unionized 40,000 childcare workers. And people are like, why? Well, let me tell you. As the mother of a 16-month-old, Childcare workers tend to be predominantly women and women of color. And so often they are the individuals that also qualify for the same state subsidies that we give them, right? And so to me, that was really important to be able to say, for decades, we've been trying to figure out how we're gonna. Oh, there you go.
That was very dramatic.
I think the building, I know, the building also liked that bill. Yeah, but I mean, that to me is also landmark legislation for me. And these have been, and both of these bills, I know, I am the legislator who put them over the line. However, they have been tried before. And so many legislators before me set, really the foundation for me to be able to do it. And that happens in the legislature, right? The predatory lending bill, 20 years of legislators trying to move that forward. The unionizing childcare workers, I don't know who didn't carry that bill at some point. And so some of it is really just being there at the right time, at the right place, and believing in some of this policy. So I think that will be, those will be legislative accomplishments for me. But I think when I think of the district and the other role that we play, because we're not just there to vote and to create and pass laws, we're also there to help our constituents. It will be the Thomas Fire that I had in my district. The Thomas Fire happened the year to date it was on the 1-year anniversary of my swearing in the state assembly, and that was, has been the largest fire for our area. For 6 months, it was the largest fire in California history, but that's since changed. We had over 100,000 people evacuated in my district. That's a lot of people to be evacuated. And I remember feeling like anything that could go wrong had gone wrong. We didn't have electricity. We didn't have, the pumps for the water weren't working. We had over 100,000 people, evacuated. At one point, we then had the debris flow in Montecito, where we lost 23 lives. And that to me is also one of the more, one of the moments that it's hard to be, I don't know that I would use the word proud, but it's one of the moments that's gonna leave one of the most lasting impressions on me as a legislator. What do you do when there is a human crisis? Your role is to try to navigate the services and resources that you can bring in a very, very, very expedited and immediate and urgent way to your district when lives depend on it. And I would say that when I think about what has meant most for my district, I think that my district would probably tell you who I was and how I represented the district in one of its worst times in history, as opposed to the legislation.
That makes sense. They say that's the mark of character, right? How you perform in difficult
and it's hard,
situations.
Folks. It's hard. When you look around and everything that's gone wrong has gone wrong, you wonder, like, what is the role of an elected official, right?
Yes.
When you, and really so many things are out of your control in times like that.
On that note, we have a number of students at McGeorge who think about running for office someday. Do you have any advice or insight?
Absolutely. I think that if it is of interest, it is, go for it. I've described myself, again, as an accidental politician. So there are so many pathways. And I think that that's the other piece that I see around me. I see that my colleagues and myself have all got into public office different ways. I think that there was a time in my life where I believed if you did the right internships, if you worked for the right people, that was the most common pathway to being an elected official. I no longer believe that. I really think these different pathways that get us to office are all very real, and they all depend on the district. But certainly, I also think that being in public office and having a title is one way to impact change. I do not believe that it is the only way to impact change. There are times where I look to, for example, committee consultants, and how incredibly influential they are with what they do and how they advise the legislators on positions and bills and their analyses as very helpful. I think there are other ways to be influential in addition to being the elected leader. So I would say, folks, explore all your options, any options. There's a lot that I can say. you've heard a theme in a lot of my comments today about how important lived experiences are. And it's not that it's not that whoever has more is better than the other. It's how we bring those lived experiences to the table to influence or shape policy that I think is really important. And that's where I feel like constituents in California respond to that. I don't believe that I got elected because I am the smartest person on every single issue, or I answered all the questions on a questionnaire well. I believe that I got elected by my district because my district could relate to some of these experiences that I have. I often try to tell folks, I don't come in with an answer on how I'm gonna vote for things or what I'm gonna do. And in my 6 years here in the state legislature, I've also tried, especially in my district, to shy away from ever making promises or telling people how I'm gonna vote on issues, but I can always talk about my values. And my values is the one thing that I hold, steady in all of this. I don't know what the bills are gonna look like, but I can tell you how I feel about this overall issue, right? I can tell you where my values stand on a lot of the bills or policies that come before us. And I think that's important as well.
Thank you so much
Yeah.
for your candor and your wisdom this evening. We have multiple programs at McGeorge for students who are interested in working at the kind of intersection of law and public policy in our capital lawyering concentration in our JD program. We have a Master's of Science in Law focused on government and public policy, and then also our MPP, MPA program. And we have students from all of those programs represented here and on our live stream. So I'd like to open the floor now to questions from members of the audience. Our Capitol Center coordinator, Maya Alexandria, is here, and she has the mic. So if you have a question, please do raise your hand. Again, this is a fantastic opportunity to talk with someone who is actually actively making policy in the state of California today. So I encourage you to take advantage of the opportunity. Who wants to go first? There we go, Mo. I can always count on you, Mo.
My question, you said that you joined the banking committee because you had no experience with that. So when you didn't have any experience, you want to try something new, what kind of tips and tricks did you use to familiarize yourself and become an expert in that area?
So this is, I promise, it's not just the educator in me that's saying this, but everything that you do as a student. Every single thing. So you read up on the issue, you learn about the issue, you talk to all the experts, you get multiple sides to come in. I mean, the amount of, just the amount of reading that I continue to do, but really at the beginning to try to catch up on the issue, going back to some hearings. Now, I don't know that all legislators do that. I think that might be, part of me. I went back to, especially when I was working on my predatory lending bill, to look at minutes and all the documents on why did it fail in the past? Like who voted who said what, right, about the issue. So I think that's, one of the ways that I quickly came up to speed. Now, in our role also, we don't have to be the ultimate expert. We are the elected, but really, again, you have a team of consultants that help you and guide you through this. There is not really a week that goes by where I am not continuing to learn about multiple issues. It's not just banking and finance, but that all really, really helped me, having the right team around me, making sure that I was looking at what the literature said about the issues, right? In banking, the literature is not all like peer reviewed, right? You're looking at constant articles, you're watching what the feds are doing, you're keeping up on, any changes in policy and so forth. And so that's really how I ended up doing it. And I think there's still a lot for me to learn in banking and finance, but I certainly have been able to learn a lot. I just think that banking and finance is just growing. Like it's gonna be hard for any one person to know everything, especially when the products that are out there are being developed as we speak and we don't know their implications, whether it's an implication to the consumer, their legal implications, the policy implications. We are having a lot of discussions right now. Well, wait, is this product gonna be, is there gonna be federal oversight? Do we create oversight for some of this? I mean, it's still evolving. And I get to be in the middle of that, which I think is exciting. Mm-hmm.
In reference the oil industry and the cleanup of the old wells, we don't have an oil severance tax. Texas has one, Oklahoma has one. You know, we're probably one of the liberal states in the union, and we don't have one. What do you think of the prospect of it? I haven't seen any bills in the last few years.
Right. So I think that the prospects of an oil severance tax are very limited in the California state legislature. And I say that because that is among the hardest, bills that we could probably pass in that particular space. There have been different attempts, but this is hard. I have watched that what makes the oil issues hard in this state is the fact that we are trying to address them for 58 different counties, right? And communities who all have very different feelings about our sources of energy and who all feel, who all have a different opinion about where our reliance should be. Everybody agrees we want clean air, we want clean water, we want uncontaminated soil. But there is also a real conversation about how we achieve that. And I mean, we haven't been able to get a lot done in the oil space. To be quite frank with you, I think that would be very difficult. I know legislators have talked about it. And one of the reasons that I've not looked at running a bill like that is because I'm also very aware of how do we try to pass something versus something that's dead on arrival. And I think that would be very difficult. I don't think that there is the political will to put that forward. I mean, there's 120 legislators, 58 counties. I just don't think it's there. I could be wrong, but I'm spend a lot of time in this space in the legislature, and it's not there. There's a lot of other things that Texas does as well. They do setbacks, for example, right? And I don't know if anyone followed that a year or two ago, we had a setbacks bill, right? Something Texas already does, and we were not able to get it out of the legislature. It had very, very, very strong opposition. So I also think that in general, there's a perception that we can do anything and everything in a blue liberal state like California, but I think that actually masks are real challenges, that there are very blue counties, very blue parts of the state, but they're not all blue, and they don't agree. If you go to Kern County, they're really not gonna agree with us on our approach to some of, our energy policy.
Hi, so along those same lines, what would you say, like how do you build a coalition that actually can get, legislation regulating the oil and gas industry through the state of California? Because I think a lot of people look at, like you said, a blue state, what's stopping it from happening? And you mentioned kind of the diversity of the counties, which totally makes sense. But I feel like there's more going on than just that there are other obstacles at play. And I don't know if you have kind of some insight and perspective on that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that there's a lot of obstacles, first of all. Like, this is a very powerful industry, right? With the resources to hire, you name it, scientists, environmentalists, lobbyists, whoever you want to be subject matter experts that can go talk to 120 legislators all at the same time if they wanted to, right? There's just a lot of things that the industry has the ability to do given its strength. And, but I also, I mean, I think that it's regulating, we don't agree on what the regulation should be. I think that that's one of it. 120 legislators don't agree. We don't always agree on the timelines for the regulation, on the regulatory process, on the implementation. I mean, the list goes on. Implementation process, on who's going to actually do the follow-up. Some of you may be following, like, we've had different agencies at the state, right? We've kind of transformed them. We've changed their mission so that they could be the ones that oversee the oil and gas in our state of California. But the other piece is that I think a lot of things have to line up. One, as I talked about predatory lending, as I talked about my unionizing bill, or even pay equity that I'm working on now, it was decades in the making. I think every once in a while, it appears that we just get these big bills done overnight. And my predecessor said, oh yeah, you know, she was talking about I think it was like her Women on Corporate Boards bill. She's the former senator that was in the seat. She's like, it was my 35-year overnight success. Because it appeared to the public that it was they got it out in 1 year. We didn't. I mean, she's been working on that 35 years, and she's not kidding. She really was working on that 35 years, right? And I think that that's the same issue with oil. Our gains are not always as big as the public would like for them to be, but I think that we do have gains. I think they're smaller gains, and I think that there are a lot of different elements that are required. I also think legislators reflect and, you know, often are the voice for their district. So it's not always convincing the 120 legislators. Like, I have said this over and over. If people really feel strongly about switching the position that I have, then they have to go switch the position of my constituents. And that doesn't happen overnight. And I've even said this, right, to directly to the oil industry, like, my position is exactly what my district wants my position to be. And so someone won't really necessarily be able to completely, right, do all the influencing themselves unless something's coming from the district. I also think that, like anything else, we're a very, very big state. And sometimes it's a matter of the right timing. I've seen legislation happen where it just was the right timing. There was something that happened, right, in our lives that changed the way that we thought about this. So whether it's fire, the Me Too movement. I mean, we've been talking about, right, sexual harassment for years, but it turns out that we didn't get a lot of bills passed until there was this moment in time that was captured, that was combined with policy making at the same time. So there are a lot of elements that influence. I think that there's a lot more that we can do. Certainly, I think folks also think about industries and buying off members and this and that. I think that people would be surprised that it's not as black and white as that. I think there really are complicated issues. One of my colleagues, Rudy Salas, he represents the Central Valley, and he and I actually, a few years back, decided to do a joint energy tour. So we spent a day with him in Bakersfield. He could show us whatever he wanted. So all we did was tour, right, industry. And then I got to pick a day, and we took other legislators with us, and I got to pick a day in my district to show him my side of the oil industry. And it was, right, this like abandoned well oil problem that was gonna cost us $100 million. And you know, in a moment like that, we just really are coming from two different worlds and two different perspectives. But I think both of us, even though I joke with Rudy, I have yet to be able to get him to vote on any of my oil bills. But you know, we were trying to figure out, how do you get to a better understanding on how to solve a very complicated problem when you really are coming from a very different lens around the mission, the purpose, and the future of energy.
First of all, thank you, Senator. This has been fascinating. So I have a very, I don't know, it's might be like a sausage made kind of a question. But I was fascinated by you saying that part of your process in getting your predatory lending bill through was looking at where it had failed in the past. Could you go into more detail, like what did you discover by looking, and how did that, looking into the past, and how did that influence how you shape what you ultimately proposed? I was very just fascinated by that aspect.
Yeah, so it's not always pretty, and I think that's why they call it sausage making. But I went back to the 1990s because actually this product didn't exist. We didn't have it, it wasn't allowed in California until then. And I went back to the hearings to really understand what then the chair and authors of the bill who created this, for me, what was a loophole, what their intention was, right? And so I went back with my committee consultant, we looked, we read, and we're like, okay, they say this. And I mean, I actually brought that forward to a couple members, and I said, this is what was said when this product, like, it was never intended to be X. This is very clear that it was intended to be Y. And it works for some people and it doesn't others. But I also did that for my own understanding. I had been told this was gonna be a very heavy lift, that it would be very difficult to pass, and I failed 2 years before I was able to get it out, meaning it died somewhere in the process, right? And so I needed to go back to figure out how I convinced others to be able to vote for it. So is that through a negotiation process? Is that watering down the bill? Is it strengthening the bill? Is it helping people have understanding, a better understanding? I mean, another thing that I did is I held more informational hearings on this policy issue. I remember putting together a binder for every one of my banking committee members with like, here you go. Here's what's been done in the past. Here's also articles, right? Popular articles, like whether it was editorials or others. And I wasn't telling them to vote or not vote in a certain way. I was saying, I need you to know what is happening on this particular issue, because that's another piece that we do some, we try to help others gain that information for themselves as well. It was a really big fight. I mean, at the peak of the fight up here in Sacramento, I want to say they were spending, the opposition was spending about $50,000 a week in Sacramento media buy against my bill. It was a little significant. I think that's a lot of money. That's more money than some of the people who took out these loans make a year. I knew that we were really getting close, but at that time, I think a lot of other political things aligned, where the bill had gotten traction for a couple years. We had leadership in both houses paying attention to the bill. And then all of a sudden, when you see the governor's office start to sway, like to input and like say, oh, we want to know about this bill, where are you at in the negotiations? All of these things are pieces that signal that there may be some interest to try to, that people believe it's going to get to the finish line. But again, it took many years of people before me. I did not get it out the first 2 years that I introduced it. It took a little while, and I came back with the same concept, but a different strategy each time. And by the time I did it my third year, I also had a huge coalition. Like at that point, I had failed 2 years. I was like, I had veterans groups, I had religious groups. There was this moment on the assembly floor where one of my Republican colleagues got up, and he got a lot of press for this, but I knew we had done some good work when you had a Republican getting up saying something along the lines of, I am a free, loving capitalist, but at some point, this is just too much greed. Something along the lines, right? And I was like, bingo, and just even on the religious front, I had so many religious groups that were part of this effort, because they had seen people in their, in their congregation, at their church, or what have you, their synagogue, like they had seen them impacted by this product. So we use a lot of tools to get bills out, there's the ugly parts of sausage making, but there's also, I think, really awesome parts where you just realize, I saw the list of all the supporters of the bill, and I was like, wow, we really came a long way, in the last few years to try to get the momentum and energy out there on the bill. And I'm so glad that I ran that bill, because it also went into effect right before COVID.
Which is so key.
Which was so key. We didn't know COVID was going to happen.
I think last question, Maya? Okay, yes, Marissa.
So tying back to your foundation, I know you have close ties with education. So I'm just curious, with that background and then working in the assembly and then in the Senate, I also come from a very low income community as well, and I know that education is kind of that bridge to rising up the community. I'm curious what you saw as successful legislation, what you kind of saw as like just move, it didn't really have a big effect, and what you kind of think the future of like pulling these communities up lies in. I know there's the mental health movement, the First Five, and all those things, so I'm curious what you think is the big move.
Right, yeah, so for me, education still continues to be, a very important aspect of what we do to help our communities with social and economic mobility, but it's not the only one. And I think that as you look at all of the programs that we fund, whether it's through social services, as you've mentioned, or others, I think that my takeaway is that one, poverty is huge, right? And if we could have addressed it and if there was an easy solution for it, we would have already done this. And so we are now at the point where we're left with like, we've tried so many different things. But my takeaway is that poverty is also not just within one policy area. Like it needs to be examined through every single policy area, right? Like what does the environment mean to our low income communities? What about health? What about education, right? Social services. I mean, the list just goes on and on and on. I mean, emergency services over and over. All of these, I think, are really important because I think poverty is not going to be solved until we really understand that all the right elements need to be in place. And I think that it's also, you know, we are a very big state. We have an incredible capacity in the state of California, but we are a state. We are not, right, our federal government. And so the alignment of federal, state, county, cities, wow. I wish that we were sometimes more aligned, but I have to tell you that I often hear a conversation of we want more authority, we want more autonomy. Like, I mean, depends on who you're talking to, but how do we all make it align? I think I've learned in this role that when I think of the state of California and every agency that represents it, I really believe that there are so many well-intentioned individuals running our state agencies with you know, the best interest in mind to try to help all Californians, but especially those that are struggling the most. However, we're a very big state, and even you know, your best interest, best intentions are not enough to be able to make a state like ours work, where individuals or communities can get lost in the shuffle. And I think that that's something that we see happen, right, over and over. We also see unprecedented things happen. Like when I look at our EDD department, right, to go from 0 to 200, like % increase overnight is not sustainable. I wish we could do more planning for the future and have more foresight for what the future needs may or may not be for a state like ours. But oftentimes, even as state legislators, we find ourselves doing what's needed in the present without the ability to think that far in advance. And when we're thinking far in advance, it's like 2, 3, 4, 5 years. I think an example of that is even our budgeting process. What are commitments we can make on an ongoing basis versus commitments we can only make for a couple years, right? And that is going to be a constraint we will have. It's not an easy constraint to just write a bill and say no more of that because, you know, because we don't know, right? And so it's that uncertainty and that balance between planning for the future, but also living in the present and knowing that a lot of things can change. COVID, I think, has been among the biggest examples that we could see of not only a moment in time that's impacted us, that's taken us from here we are thinking we're doing okay to like, oh my gosh, we don't have anything under control, right? To like, now we're back on the ground, we're doing things better, but also the people who were already struggling had it worse and still continue to have it worse, whether it was on the health side because they were getting COVID the most and dying of COVID, or on the unemployment side, I mean, the transportation side, really my list just kind of goes on and on and on. So it's a hard stuff, but we are making, I think, we're trying to make those investments while balancing what a short-term and long-term investment is, and we have a lot more work to do.
Thank you for all those questions. They were fantastic, and I want to make sure we have time for students to meet Senator Limon. We have Ashley here taking photographs, so if you'd like to get a picture, that would be fantastic as well. We have a reception in the back, and thank you again. I cannot tell you how much we appreciate your sharing your expertise and your insight with all of our campus community and those on live stream tonight. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for having me. This was fun. Thank you.
Okay.